This is Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Ayin Gimel, and as we close in on the final few daf of Meseches Kiddushin, and believe it or not, all of Seder Nashim, we'd like to dedicate today's shir to a close friend of the daf as a refuah shalema for Batsheva Bas Atzirol Bracha B'siyata Deshmaya. The incredible Schus HaTorah should be Megan and bring Batsheva Basar Bracha a complete refuah shlema, as well as the learning should be as chos Farim Menachem Moshe ben Bina Taiva as well, who should have a complete protection, only the protection that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should provide to a soldier, Menachem Moshe ben Dina Taiva. Finally, if anyone is around on Sunday, I do hope to attend the Siyum at Bellworks, the Siyum.org, a Siyum organized by the Aguda as we round up half of Shas. Believe it or not, yes, we finish half of Shas in the middle of Kiddushin, but as we celebrate Seder Nashim and Mirza Hashem, we will gather. Not only will it be a Siyum, there will also be Tefillah, there will also be Chizik for Achinu Kol Beis Yisrael. And we pick it up on Ayin Beis, Amid Beis, Tanu Rabbanan. We continue with the sugya of who is a ger allowed to marry. Tanu Rabbanan. Ger, says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom. Noise mamzeres. Says the Gemara, a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres, a divrei Rav Yosi. Rav Yehuda Omer, ger lo yisa mamzeres. A ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. We're already having some lip sync issues, a little bit odd. 1 second. Continues Rabbi Yehuda, echad ger, on the last line, ve'echad eved meshuchar v'cholol muteres bekehenes. A ger, eved that was freed, a cholol are all allowed to marry a kohenes. So says the Gemara, let's understand, what is this machlokes Rav Yosi and Rav Yehuda again? Rav Yosi allowing a ger to marry a mamzeres, Rav Yehuda disallowing. My term with Rav Yosi, says the Gemara, it's exeris akasav of sorts. Chamishi kahali ksiva. It says the word kahal 5 times in the Torah. As we turn over to Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, what are the 5 times? Chad lekohanim, chad leleviim, chad liyisraelim, chad lemishei mamziri b'shtuki, v'chad lemishei shtuki b'Yisrael. I apologize for the video issues over here. That the 5 mentions of kohanim or what of kahal or what? Kahanim Levi Israeli. One is to allow a mamzer to marry a shtuki. One is allowing a mamzer to marry shtuki. Excuse me, be Israeli a shtuki to marry Israeli. Kahal gerim loy ikri kahal. So all 5 mentions of the word kahal are utilized, and therefore we do not have a word kahal that could be utilized for gerim. So gerim are not called a kahal, and therefore because gerim are not called a kahal, therefore Rav Yosi says a ger is not part of kahal Yisrael, and therefore they're allowed to marry a mamzeres. Rav Yehuda disagrees, and he says kahanim levi mechad kal nafki. Kahanim levi learns that from one kahal, and therefore yatilu lekal gerim. We have an extra kahal utilized for gerim. Says Rav Yehuda, gerim are certainly, yes, part of kahal Yisrael, and therefore says Rav Yehuda they cannot marry a mamzeres. Source number 1 for the machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Yosi. Viba Yisema, says the Gemara, a second source where Rav Yehuda learns that a ger cannot marry a mamzeres achanami trei kahali ninu. It's true. Kahanim and Levim are 2 separate kahals. But mamziri v'shtuki v'Yisrael, those 2 are mechad kahal mamzer. They could both be learned out from one word of kahal. How? Lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, says the pasuk. From there, we learn mamzer vadehud lo yavo mamzer safek, which is the case of shtuki and asufi yavai b'kahal yavai b'kahal. Yavai, they could marry. Bekal vadehud lo yavai bekal safek yavai. So 2 sources for the din of Rav Yehuda, and finally a third source. V'ibay yisenu hananami trei kahali nenu. The third source is that really these also need their own 2 sources. So we need one for Kahanim, we need one for Leviim. It's true. We need one for Mamzeri, Shtuki, and Asufi. So where do we have an extra one? V'tayim Rav Yehuda me'hacha. From the following pasuk, it says, "Akal chuka achas lachem uleger ulager." Says the pasuk that the kahal chuka achas has one halacha, one chayik lachem v'lager hagar, and for the ger that is amongst them. So from here we see that the ger has the same status as the regular kahal. Says the Gemara Rav Yosi. What does Rav Yosi do with his final pasuk? Chuka achas. He says that the word chukah achas breaks up the pasuk, and therefore we do not know that the gerim are part of Kal Yisrael. Therefore, says Rav Yosi, a ger could indeed marry a mamzeres. And we continue quoting the aforementioned brisa. Says the brisa, echad ger, ve'echad ever meshachar, ve'cholo mutarim b'koyhanis. All of these groups are allowed to marry a koyhanis. Says the Gemara, this is indeed Masayele l'Rav Zaraya to Rav. Damar Rav Yudah Marav. Explains Rav Yudah and the Rav, Lo Yehozru Kisheiros Linasei Lipsulim. Like Kisheiros, the women who are kosher do not have the same Yisurim from marry those who are psulim. Meaning, he that a kohen cannot marry, or say better, she that a kohen cannot marry is not the same person that the kohenes, the daughter of the kohen. The daughter of the kohen has different rules than her father, the kohen, and that's what we see over here. The kohenes, who's the daughter of the kohen, is allowed to marry a ger, evan, meshachar, and a chalal, even though a kohen himself would not be allowed to marry the counterparts. Continues the Gemara. We just finished discussing a machlekes Rav Yosi and Rav Yehuda whether a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres, whether a ger is considered kahal and therefore has the regular isser to marry a mamzeres or not. Continues the Gemara with a story. Zeira b'mechuza. I apologize. Okay, let's leave off the video and let's continue. Zeira b'mechuza ger. Darash Rav Zera b'mechuza. Rav Zera darash b'mechuza. Ger mutar b'mazeres. A ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. What happened when he said that? Rigma'u kuli alma b'esrugayu. They pelted him with esrogim. Mechuza was a town that had a lot of gerim, and they were quite upset that he was darshaning that they were not considered a kahal. They pelted him with esrogim. Amar Rava, says Rava, mi ika didarish milsa kiai v'dochla dishchichli guri. What are you doing? You don't make such a josh in a place of all gerim. So what did Rava do? Darash Rava Mechuza ger motar b'kehenis. First, Rava went to Mechuza, and he got up and he gave a Joshua that a ger is allowed to marry Kehanis, which is elevating the Gerim. So what happened? Tanua b'shirayu, they loaded him up with silks. They were so happy. Hadadarshlu, then he said, ger motar b'mamzeres, allowed to marry a mamzeres. Amruleh, they said to Rava, said, you lost that which you said good. Rava responded, whatever is good for you could do. And of course, it is a little bit difficult to understand what is this that the rabbi needs the popular opinion. The Rava said you shouldn't darshan in the city of Gerim. Definitely a point that needs it to be discussed further. V'Hilchasa concludes the Gemara for now on the first white line of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, Ger mutar b'kayanes o mutar b'mamzeres. Mutar b'kayanes while lo zeru. We're paskening like Rav Yosi that the Gerim are not considered a kahal and therefore they are allowed to marry the kohenis. Continues the Gemara, Elu hein shtuki. What is a shtuki? The Mishnah taught us kol shamakir es aviv ve'es ima. Ve'inay makir es aviv. He does not know his father. That is considered a shtuki. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava. Devar Torah, the second wide line, Midaraisa Shtuki Kasher. Midaraisa, a Shtuki is allowed to marry a regular Yisraelis. My time, what is the reason? Let's understand. Again, we have a child, a Shtuki. We know this kid's mother is. However, unfortunately, we do not know who the kid's father is. And basically, the point that we need to figure out is this kid's father kosher or not? So says the Gemara, let's utilize the classical rules of Roiv, of Chazaka, and thereby determine, like Rava, that the Torah Shtuki is going to be kosher. Explains the Gemara, my time Roiv Kashir Metzla. Majority of men, are mutter to the mother of the Shtuki. Whereas Mia Psula Metzla, a woman, majority of the world is mutter to her, only a Mia is basal, Arayis v'chulu, v'azli inhu ligaba. And therefore, if a man from the world went and was together with this woman, and from their relationship gave birth to this child, who we don't know who this kid is, this is Shtuki. What's the halacha? The halacha is that this man left from the Rav who was kosher, went to this woman, called the Parish. Anyone who separates is assumed to be Meruba Parish. And therefore, that is the reason why we assume that the kid is kosher. So what are you going to respond to my Amrit? What are you going to respond? No. Dilma Azli Ihi Ligabayu. In the world of Rav, in the world of Chazak, it only works if whoever is kaiveya, whoever is sad, whoever goes to the other one. So if she stays in her place and he goes to her, then it's true. She's considered kavua, he's considered to go from the Rav, and everything will be good. But I asked the Gemara, maybe she went to him, and therefore, havalei kavua. He is considered kavua, v'chol kavua, and whenever it's kavua, k'mechsa dami, it's 50-50. If it's 50-50, then what's the problem? The problem is that we have no more roiv that he was kosher. Says Gemara, it's not a problem. Mamzer says the Torah, a mamzer cannot come into Klal Yisrael. And from there we darshan, as we darshaned earlier, mamzer vadayu d'lo yavai. Ha mamzer safek yavai yavai, b'kal vadayu d'lo yavai. Ha b'kal safek yavai. So says the Gemara, even if she went to him, it's still not a problem. So says the Gemara, so why would a shtuki be possible? So ostensibly, midaraisa, the shtuki is yes allowed to marry anyone. He's allowed. This child's allowed to marry anyone that's kosher. Came along the chachamim and they said no, do not to marry shtuki is possible. Why? Because we're afraid that this child might end up marrying achaisai me'aviv. He doesn't know who his sister is because he doesn't know who his father is. So therefore, he might end up marrying his paternal sister. Asks the Gemara 1 second. Al me'ata shtuki b'shtukis lo yisa. Asks the Gemara, shtuki should not even be allowed to marry a shtukis. Why shamiza chayse me'aviv? We should have the same problem. Says the Gemara, no. Kol kihani mazni vazni. Do we suspect that the father had so much to know, so we're having two shtukis? No, that far we're not worried. Says the Gemara, Bas Shtukis lo yisa. 1 second. Shtuki should not be allowed to marry the daughter of a Shtukis. Shamisa chayz me'aviv. Says the Gemara, you know why we're not concerned about? El lo shchicha. Must be it's not common. Achanami lo shchicha. El also says the Gemara, you're right. So what is the reason why a Shtuki is also to marry someone who is kosher? Malu asu b'yochsa. There's no one particular issue that could be, but it's a special maila they made in Yochsan, and that is they did Dirabanan. V'amar Rava, continues Rava in a similar vein. We just spoke about a shtuki. Says Rava Dvar Torah Sufi Kasher Midaraisa and Asufi. 8 lines to the bottom of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, and Asufi is Kasher. My time. Oh, what's the reason? Eishes Ishbi Baila Taila. We have a child. What's an Asufi? An Asufi is we don't know who either parent is. The child is abandoned. And therefore, if this child came from an Eishes Ish, a woman that was Mizana was sown aside for her husband, such a woman, if she were to have a child, Babaila Taila, she wouldn't abandon the kid. You know what she would say? She would just claim that the child came from her own husband, and she would keep the child. Why would she abandon the child? Ma'ika. So what are you going to say? We have a miyat that maybe they had relations where they only had erusin, or their husbands went overseas and there are those, a woman who's not married that might have had relations, and it could be that it could be that the child was forsaken due to starvation. Have a palga, therefore it's considered 50-50. Four lines to the bottom. So on a daraisa level, and a Sufi should yes be let him marry into Klal Yisrael. What is the reason they say not? A Sufi basal. You know why? Shema Yisa Chaysay Me'aviv. Because we're afraid that the Asufi might end up marrying, similar to the Ishtuki, the Asufi might end up marrying a Chaysay Me'aviv, his paternal sister. Elamayata asked the Gemara, Asufi, Asufis Lagisa, Shamisa Achos Ben Me'av Ben Me'imai. Says Gemara, Kol Hani, Shadi Vazli. Says the Gemara, no, not everyone is just going to leave their child and run. Bas Asufi asked the Gemara, Lagisa, Shamisa Achos. So what's the reason why an Asufi Lamaisa is not allowed to marry someone who's kosher? So both an Asufi and a Ishtuki, the reason why they're not allowed to marry a regular kosher is because of just a Maila B'Yochsin, no what, not one particular issue. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Ravuna Matzah Ma'ol. So now let's go a little bit deeper, trying to figure out what is the status of this child that is found. Matzah Ma'ol. If you find a child in the street, but the child had a bris milah, says Rava Bar Ravuna, the fact that the parents went and gave the kid a bris before abandoning the child shows ein bahem mishum asufi, shows that the child is not considered an abandoned child, as the Tab Rashi points out, because the parents would not have gone through the bother and given the kid a bris milah if the kid was not a kosher kid. And therefore, why must they have abandoned the kid? They must abandon the kid for other reasons. They couldn't afford to feed him, etc. Continues the Gemara. Mishalti hadamel. Similarly, if the limbs were straightened, again, we're going to have a whole list now, all different cases in which we're going to see that the child was tended and cared for in certain ways, and therefore we're going to say, because the parents cared for the child, shows they didn't just abandon him. They abandoned him, but shows that the kid was kosher. Continues the Gemara in the second line of Ayin Gimel Habei, Shayef Mishcha, the child was massaged with oil, Amailu Kuchla, or powdered around the eyes with different medicines. Rami Chumra, if there were herb knots tied around him. Tali Pitkov, there was an amulet hanging from him. Ein by Misham Asufi. Tali Bediklov, the child was hanging in a basket from a palm tree, then it depends. If a child could reach, then Yeshua Misham Asufi, the parents left it in Sakana, must be, it was an illegitimate child. Continues the Gemara, Zardasa, if it was found on a certain sorb tree near the city, Yeshua Misham Asufi. But Vimlav in my Misham Asufi. What is the reason? So Rashi over here speaks out, is because such a tree is full of shadim. Continues the Gemara, Beit Kanishta, if this child was found in a shul, Samichta Lamasav, it's near the city, Yushchik Baram, and then there are people there, Ein Mamisham Asufi, because the shul is a safe place. Vim Lav, if it's an abandoned or it's not in the city and there are shadim, then Yesh Bai Misham Asufi, it's considered to be an Asufi. Amar Amimer adds on, Hai Peira Disofli, Yesh Bai Misham Asufi. If it's a ditch used to store dates, if a child is found there, it's considered an Asufi. Charifta Dinara, Ein Bai Misham Asufi. If it's found in the river channel, it's not. Pishri, Yesh Bai Misham Asufi. If it's found floating in meltwater, the area on the side of the river banks, then Yesh Bai Misham Asufi. Sidi Rosh Hashanah, Ein Bai Misham Asufi. Rosh Hashanah itself, Yesh Bai Misham Asufi. So different qualifications depending on the level of danger, etc. We figure out whether the child was not kosher, and that's why the parents abandoned the child. Amar Rava, continues the Gemara. Rava says a statement. Rava says, in the years of a famine, we don't assume that the child is an asufi. Ask the Gemara, what case is Rava going on? It's true that it's a famine, but they're going to kill the kid, leave the kid in the middle of the street. It can't be. But so what does Rava mean? Only because it's years of a famine? I feel we just said a moment ago. It's not a sufi if it's on the side of the street. Rava's going in the following din. Calls when a child is found in the marketplace and the child is still in the marketplace, about 20 lines down, first one line is Sheba Shuk, the parents are believed to say it's their child. In Nesaf Min Shuk, once the child is gathered in for the marketplace, the parents are not believed anymore. My taima, once it's a Shema Sufi, then the parents are no longer believed to say that this is their child. And Rava says, but Aviv v'imay namana love were more forgiving. The parents have more time to say that it is indeed their child. They just abandoned him for poverty reasons, but that's only in years of a famine. That is when they'll believe, even when it's gathered in from the shuk. In a similar vein, once we're on the topic of people that have an emunah only right away, Amar Rav Chisda Shloisha, 3 people in emunah la'alter only believe right away. Leina Sufi Chaya upaiteres chavroisel. Asufi hadamar, and like we just said, that the parents are only believed right away to say it's their kid, unless, of course, the din of Rava Shnei Ra'avoin. Chaya, what is the din of a Chaya? The Tanya. Chaya, the midwife, is Nemenes Lomer Zeyos Rishav Zeyos Sheni. If the Chaya wants to give eidos about which child came out first, the midwife is believed. But Medvar Mamurim Shlayatza v'Chazra. Aval Yatza v'Chazra Einay Ne'emenes. That's only if the child did not go in. Excuse me, it's only if, incorrect. It's only if the midwife did not leave the room and come back. But if she left the room and come back, then she loses her ne'emanas. We don't believe that the moment she leaves the room, she can tell which twin is which. And that is another thing that she's only believed right away. Rav Eliezer Aimer, Hochslika alay medes ne'emanas. If she stayed in where she was, she'd believe him lav. Einoi ne'emanas. That is the din of Rav Eliezer. He is even more machmer. You have to mamish not even turn your face away from the child. Now, what's the difference? He went out the other Abba. She turned her face. Then, according to Rav Eliezer, that's it. She loses her Na'amana. She can't testify about these twins anymore. According to the Tanikama, she still would be believed as long as she did not leave the room. And finally, the third case, Paiteres Chavreisel Amayi. What is the case of one pottering up her friend in the world of Nida de Tanana Mishnah? 3 women are sleeping on a bed, achas on one bed, they woke up and they find the stain of blood on the bed. So now we know one of these 3 women bled during the night, and one of them is an Nida. We don't know which one. The lacha is kula and tameya, they're all tummy. But badka achas meya, and if one of them checked herself and found out that she indeed is an Nida, she is middle of her menstrual cycle, she is bleeding. Vinim says tameya, he tameya v'kula and tahayres. And on this last day, Amar Rav Chisda Shabbat Ka'atzma Kishir vested. It's only if she checks herself right away, only then is she believed to permit the other women. That's the third case that the Namanas is only if it's said right away. And finally, we'll conclude Tana Rabban in about 13 lines at the bottom. First line is Namenas. Namenas Chaya Leimer Zeh Koyim Zeh Levi Zeh Nesim Zeh Mamzer. But Medvar Mamurim, when is the midwife believed? Shlakara Lashem Error is only as long as there was no challenge that was made. Avalkar love error, Einoi Na'amanes, once a challenge is raised, once someone opens their mouth questioning the story, then she is no longer believed. Ir Damai says to Gemara, what is this case of error? What are you talking about? If it's one person questioning, you need 2 people. Eli Trey must be 2 people. Really, it's only one person. When did Rav Yechanan say that Ir needs 2 people? And therefore, in this case, one person will be believed against the midwife. Another case of a credibility only right away. We'll pick it up from the Baal Mekachs, the owner of merchandise credibility in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.